Good afternoon. My name is Gay McMath and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the University of Western Australia. I'd very much like to welcome you here today and thank you for coming along for the celebration of the International Women's Day. This university acknowledges that it is situated on Noongar land and that the Noongar people remain the spiritual and cultural custodians of the land and continue to practice their values, beliefs and culture. I would like to acknowledge today Professor Paul Johnson, our Vice-Chancellor and keynote speaker, Professor Alec Cameron, the Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor, our Deans, Professor Helen Wildey, Dean of the Faculty of Education, Professor Ian Puddy, the Dean of Medicine and Dentistry and Health Sciences, Professor John Dell, Dean of the Faculty of Engineering, Computing and Mathematics, and Professor Phil Dolan, Dean of Business, and thank them all for their attendance. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Liz Constable, the Vice-Chancellor's Fellow, and Ms Jenny Robertson, the Acting Director of Human Resources, and Ms Beverly Hill, the Associate Director of Equity and Diversity, and the fantastic team in our Human Resources area at UWA. And a very, very special and warm welcome to Ms Alana Lucas. Alana is currently acting in the position of WA Commissioner for Equal Opportunity. Thank you for attending today, Alana. We very much appreciate you fitting this into your very busy schedule. Alana chairs the CEOs for Gender Equity Group, which also includes our Vice-Chancellor. And I think it is very heartening to see that groups such as the CEOs for Gender Equity have been formed, replicating an initiative at a national level led by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Ms Elizabeth Broderick. Her Male Champions of Change group has positioned women's rights as an issue for Australian businessmen to address in their workplace, both by making policy decisions around equity for women, but also pledging a personal leadership to making a difference within their organisations. Elizabeth highlighted the need for Australians to change the way we all think about women and work. She stated that flexible work arrangements help strengthen Australia's economy and that decent, flexible and safe working hours are needed for women to ensure their long-term financial security. Ms Broderick has delivered this message alongside business leaders, policy makers and academics in major cities as part of the UN Women Australia's International Women's Day Breakfast Roadshow. The perennial issue of underrepresentation of women in many areas of employment and leadership, the widening pay gap, the increasing challenge of finding a balance between our public and our personal lives, which may include a range of caring and cultural obligations, means that this is an issue that must be addressed by all, for women, by women, and by men. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is inspiring change. And who better to speak to us today than the university's champion of change, our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Paul Johnson. Paul, prior to his appointment at UWA in 2012, was the Vice-Chancellor at La Trobe University, and prior to that he was the Deputy Director of the London School of Economics. Professor Johnson received his doctorate from Oxford University in 1982 and has been an expert advisor on pension reform, the economics of demographic change to the World Bank, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, and the British Government and House of Lords. He's also a very nice bloke. He's a husband and a father of 2 delightful, energetic young children. And so I think Paul today will be able to share with us not just his formal thoughts on the case for gender equity in higher education, but also his personal commitment to leading this university in a way that is a great place for all people to work, women and men alike. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in inviting Professor Paul Johnson to talk to us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gay, for that lovely introduction. Many thanks to Bev Hill for inviting me along to speak today. And above all, thank you to everyone here for carving out some time during your very busy working lives here at UWA to come along to listen to me. I'm going to take the opportunity today to talk a little bit about the university, but I want to do that in the context of the university's values and also to talk about value, as an economist might. Values, we have a very clear statement here at the university about the university values, and perhaps the key one for today is that we state equity and merit as the fundamental principles for the achievement of the full potential of all staff and students. That is there in our strategic plan, it's in all our core documents. But I carry a heavy burden, and it's a burden of having been trained as an economist. So, the dismal science. So I also, whenever I hear the word values, I also think of value as an economist might look at it. What is the value that we can get out of doing something? Value to me then also means how we utilize resources in an effective and efficient manner. And in terms of my role here at UWA, how we use resources in an effective and efficient manner to advance the interests of the institution. And I think we need to recognize that there can be a congruence between these two objectives, between the moral values and economic value. They can both point in the same direction. And I want to talk about why in this university I think we need to give more attention to gender equity in order to meet both our moral and our economic objectives. There are, of course, many challenges that we face in the university. The one I want to dwell on is the particular challenge of gender equity in senior academic roles here at UWA. I can't promise any easy solutions, but I will make some suggestions of things that we might try, and I'd certainly be very interested in hearing your views about how we might address this issue. Let me begin, though, with a quick review of circumstances in the rest of the economy before I turn to issues closer to home. As you will all be aware, over the last few days, there's been a lot of press coverage relating to International Women's Day and about breaking through the glass ceiling. By the way, I don't like that analogy, and I'll say why a little bit later. A lot of reportage about women on corporate boards. Women now account for over 20% of board members of ASX 200 companies. Hurrah, we say. On the other hand, more than a third of ASX 200 companies have no female board member at all, and only fewer than 6% of them have a female CEO. And it's not just the business world that we see those sorts of figures. Women account for 57% of Commonwealth public service employees, but barely 1/3 of government board positions are held by women, despite all that the government says about gender equity. Over 60% of law graduates are female, but women account for fewer than a quarter of senior positions in law firms and only 16% of judges in the federal court. 28% of parliamentarians are female, and as we all know, just 1 of 19 cabinet ministers. Alas, the Prime Minister was here opening the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research earlier this morning. I did not have a chance to collar him on that particular issue. In sports, which of course many people view as far more important than politics, Women account for only 22% of board directors of national sports organisations, and 1 in 5 of these organisations has no female board members, even though the proportion of males and females who participate in sporting activity at least once a week in Australia is almost identical. So that's the rest of the economy. What about universities? Are we doing better? Well, in governance in the higher education sector, we do a lot better than the corporate sector. Women comprise fully 40% of university governing bodies. Here at UWA, however, women comprise just 19% of our Senate, a position not helped by the fact that all 3 elected academic staff members of Senate, all 3 elected student members of Senate, and 3 out of the 4 elected convocation members of Senate are male. So next time you're asked to vote, think about that. But in the higher education sector, we shouldn't rush to give ourselves a pat on the back too quickly. As I'll show, we've got a long way to go to achieve gender equity in higher education, particularly in the senior academic positions. And in some ways, this is surprising, because female students began to outnumber males in Australian universities 27 years ago in 1986. And you would have thought that over the last 27 years, we would have seen a huge amount of change. We have seen some change, but I think it has been remarkably slow. Women outnumber men as university students, now by about 10 percentage points. This is a really quite significant gap. But amongst students, there is a very, very pronounced gender structuring by field of study. Engineering and IT are overwhelmingly male. Education and health, overwhelmingly female, as you can see here. And this picture both reflects and contributes to gender structuring in the Australian workforce, where, again, you can see that we have a very clear over-representation, dominance of women in the education and health and social assistance sectors, and a massive underrepresentation in the classic engineering sectors of mining and construction. There are challenges here that we need to be aware of in the higher education sector. I'm sure if we had more female academics teaching engineering and teaching IT, it might be easier to attract female students into these disciplines, though I have to say I'm realistic about the limited capacity we have in universities to alter educational preconceptions that may have been formed well prior to university entry. Where we can, I think, do much more is at home in our own sector. As you can see from this chart, although women have outnumbered men in the student population for more than a quarter of a century, men still outnumber women in academic employment in Australia. Women account for 44% of academics in Australia. And here at UWA, women account for 41% of academics. And this gender structuring is much more acute in senior roles. Women account for just 28% of university academics at the higher levels, level D and E. Here at UWA, women account for just 26% of academic staff in those higher levels. And in the faculties of medicine, dentistry, health sciences, engineering, computing and maths, and science, women account for just 21% of those higher academic levels. In fact, if we look in more detail across our 3 science faculties, medicine, science and engineering, we find that medicine and dentistry now actually have a majority of females in their academic workforce, 53%. The science faculty has 36% women amongst their academic workforce. Engineering, computing and maths has just 22%. And if we take these faculties together, they're often referred to as the STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering and medicine. In total, these faculties have 169 male staff at level B and 175 female staff at level B. But at level E, full professor, there are 161 men and just 31 women. And that's 27 years on from there being parity of men and women entering universities. So we have some big questions to address. You'll also see on the right-hand side of this diagram that amongst professional staff in Australian universities, women constitute 66% of the workforce. Here at UWA, 68%, and women account for 46% of the senior roles above level 10, and 69%, so proportionate to their total employment in those lower levels. So though we have some, there is some gender structuring right across the workforce in universities, but the clear deficit is in the senior academic roles. Now, there has been change over time. There's been significant progress here at UWA over the past decade. Women have increased their share of level D and E, senior academic positions, from 12% in 2003 to 26% in 2013. I'm pleased to see that over the period from the end of 2011 through to the beginning of 2013, we've seen quite an increase. We can also see that other peer institutions, other group of 8 institutions, do better and have been doing better quite consistently over at least a decade. And if we look at the entire higher education sector, we can see that 2 institutions now have more than 40% of their academic staff at levels D and E. Those are the University of Canberra and the Australian Catholic University. And it's interesting that both those institutions recruit a very large number of their students and therefore have a very large number of their staff in the 2 areas of education and health, specifically teacher training and nursing, which have very high levels of female representation in the workforce generally and have high levels of student engagement. So that's some of the data that we need to focus on. What's stopping further progress? Because as we can see, though female student numbers have gone up, female graduates for the last quarter of a century have accounted for the majority of graduates coming out of Australian universities. But those of us within the universities who are producing all these female graduates seem not to have changed at anything like the same rate. What's stopping further progress? Is there a glass ceiling in terms of academic employment? Well, I actually think the analogy is wrong. The problem, I think, is not a glass ceiling through which individuals have to smash their way. I think the problem instead is a leaky pipe. As Sue Murphy, one of our distinguished engineering graduates and chief executive of the Water Corporation of WA, knows full well, no matter how great the pressure at the input end of a pipe, if there are a lot of holes in the pipe, you end up with massive wastage and only a trickle at the end. The problem then is a kind of systemic problem in the pipe system, nothing else. And I think that regardless of what we do to promote leadership opportunities for women in the higher education sector, I think the challenge we face in the sector is not something that can be overturned by individual effort. I think it is a systemic problem which will require systemic solutions. And in fact, I think there are many similarities between what we see in universities and what is well known in the corporate world. There was a recent Harvard Business Review survey of 4,000 senior executives in US corporations, 44% of them female, 56% male. 60% of male respondents in this survey had spouses who did not work outside the home, compared to just 10% of female respondents. A result of this was that the male executives see work-life balance not as a systemic issue, but as a women's issue. They don't see it as everyone's issue. And I think we've got the same challenge here in universities. And I think this challenge is then compounded by the highly individualized nature of research performance and evaluation. Despite the efforts of research councils and of universities, particularly to evaluate performance relative to opportunity and so on, many academics face real difficulties in re-establishing a personal research career and a research profile after some employment break. And of course, career breaks are much more common for women than for men. Time away from research means it takes time to reintegrate with the latest literature, to re-establish national and international research collaborations. It takes time to publish, it takes time to get grants. Caring responsibilities outside of the workplace mean it's more difficult to find that time, often over weekends, to attend conferences, to undertake research trips or fieldwork. Now, we know all this. It's absolutely standard knowledge, but we seem to find it hard to do anything about it other than rub our hands and say, oh, isn't it difficult? And of course, on top of all this, there's an element of academic culture which says that you can't be successful unless you obsessively devote every waking hour to your research. You are, in this worldview, a lesser academic because you want to spend time with your family, or you want to spend time playing sport, or singing, or knitting, or whatever your particular passion happens to be. I've never subscribed to this view, so as now a manager of an institution, I'm not at all sympathetic to the proposition that a never-ending accumulation of individual leave entitlements is an indicator of academic commitment. All work and no play makes Jack and Jill dull, tired, and dispirited academics. But my greatest concern in all of this is not, of course, the behaviour of individuals. It's how to promote the best interest of the institution that I have the privilege to lead. So I come back to the concurrence of values, the moral values we have, and the economic value in terms of the way we use our resources. We recruit men and women more or less equally into junior academic positions, level B academic positions, and we recruit them through merit-based selection procedures. So objectively, the men and the women that we bring in those junior positions are equally competent, equally capable of achieving the same things in their careers. But we consistently fail to advance women's careers at the same pace as men's. That concerns me because of the values we have about equity in the university. But it concerns me also because of the value I want to get out of the university's resources. I think what this represents is a huge loss of talent. And this is particularly damaging for this university, for UWA. Why? Because we're a big and powerful research organisation with a small local population base of 2.4 million people, and we're located further from another top 100 university than any other equivalent university in the world. That means we have to work 2 or 3 or 4 times as hard to recruit outstanding academics to this university than is the case for most of our national and international peers. And we simply can't afford to waste the talent that we bring into WA and that we grow and develop here. And by seeing that women's careers don't progress at the same rate as men's, we are clearly wasting talent. What can we do about that? Part of the problem, I think, is that the reignition of a research career after a break is seen to be the responsibility of the individual researcher, even though the benefits flow back not just to the individual, but to the work group, the discipline group or school or faculty in which they're based, and to the institution. And I think there's much we could do to support re-entry after a career break, for instance, by planning team-based research and by identifying in advance those aspects of a research project that would be particularly effective in reintegrating an academic member of staff into highly productive research and research publication. But that's not something that can be done by that person on their own. It has to be a commitment by the work group who perceives that it's in their joint and collective interest to support this individual re-entering the workforce. And of course, talking, it's easy to talk, isn't it? Words are cheap. Talking alone won't achieve a great deal. We do need action. We could, for instance, offer re-entering academics teaching relief in their first semester. But individual time, I think, isn't the only issue. We have to address the issue of group culture. So perhaps we could build into our promotion criteria explicit and quantifiable standards or targets about the support offered by team leaders to female academics coming back from maternity leave. And we could collect and disseminate data about performance across the university so that those areas that perform less well become aware of their performance and behaviour. After all, if you're not conscious you've got a problem, you're not going to do anything about it. And of course, those that excel could become models of good practice that can be copied more broadly. I have to say, if there were simple and effective strategies that we could see are obviously working in other universities, that we could just pick them off the shelf there and plonk them down here, then I wouldn't be showing you the data that I've shown you today about UWA performance and the performance of the sector. And I would welcome any suggestions that you may have as to what we might do to change the culture and behaviour at UWA to remove systemic obstacles to the professional advancement of female academic staff. Now, of course, you know some things we're already doing. Leadership, and very visible leadership, I think, is important. And as you know, Professor Dawn Freshwater will be joining the University Executive as Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the start of next month. And I have just this week appointed Professor Wendy Erber, Head of the School of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, as the next chair of the Academic Promotions Committee, taking over from Professor Mark Cassidy. And I think that that is a step in terms of some of the work we have to do around our criteria for promotions. We have explicit criteria around achievement relative to opportunity. I think we have to make sure that what we've written down on paper becomes the lived experience of the institution. I'm not convinced it is yet. I've also decided to do something. You know, one of the interesting things about being Vice-Chancellor of this institution is that I suppose it could be described as having lots of responsibility and very little power, because this is an institution that takes its own autonomous way through almost everything. But I can decide to do one or two things, unconstrained by Senate or academic board or any other committees. So I have decided to do the following. From the beginning of next semester, every academic selection committee in the university will have at least 40% female and 40% male members. And if that composition cannot be achieved, then the selection committee will not progress. And every shortlist for an advertised academic position will include at least one female and at least one male candidate. And if such shortlists cannot be presented to the selection committee, the selection process will not progress. So these are two small decisions I've made. I think it is important to send signals that we mustn't just talk, we must do. As I say, I would welcome any suggestions that you may have about other things that we could do, and particularly to address some of these systemic issues that I think we have right across the higher education sector. I must praise colleagues, Bev Hill and many others who have been responsible for driving the equity and diversity agenda in the university, and I would like to compliment all of those who are responsible for the Leadership Development for Women programme. But I do think we have to, as well as supporting individuals, we have to look at the structural impediments. Because ultimately, as a hard-hearted, dismal economist, I want to get maximum value out of every dollar that this university spends on its core resource, and the core resource is staff. And at present, I know, and you all know, we're not achieving that. So thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to hearing all those suggestions. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. As usual, you've given us a data-rich, fact-filled, logical but thoughtful presentation, touching most importantly on values, culture and actions. So we'll now look forward to implementing those big hints with respect to our future process for ensuring a strong, able and equitable workforce in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Paul Johnson. Could I also correct a previous acknowledgement that I missed? We're also fortunate to have Professor Tony O'Donnell in the audience, the Dean of Science, so thank you very much, Tony. Could I add my particular thanks to Bev Hill, who has been a force to be reckoned with at this university and has contributed beyond all else to this very important agenda, and also to Anneli Strutt for organising today. I'd very much like, on behalf of the university, to thank you for your attendance here today and to invite you to join us after the conclusion of today's event, or the formal part anyway, for some light refreshments and to enjoy the very talented music offered by our students from UWA's music program, Quartet with a Twist. Just in finally closing, be kind to each other. In saying that Paul's a nice bloke, I've heard him on many occasions when there have been issues come up within the immediate team where we've all had to make decisions between being at work or being with our family. Paul always says, family first, do whatever you need. So I think if we practice that in our own workplaces, even though we have many systematic problems and structural impediments to women in the workforce and promotion and what have you, it's how we treat each other based on our core values and beliefs. So on that note, thank you very much for coming along today, and please join us for refreshments. Thank you.